love all the weird little auxiliary characters available to the Imperium, the Voidsmen at Arms, the Adeptus Arbites, and of course, the Imperial Assassins. I have a Master Sniper in my Vindicare Assassin, and I have a spooky shapeshifting Calidus with her definitely not Necron phase sword. These guys are super fun to paint up, and I made little scary skull faces for them. These guys typically don't have scary masks because they're meant to do their business unseen. But there's another assassin who is very much meant to make an entrance. The Eversor Assassin. Where those other guys are meant to discreetly kill like one target, the Eversor is to whom it may concern. If you've got a Chaos Uprising, you don't just need to kill the head honcho, you also gotta kill the entourage and the bodyguards and maybe the entire town, and you gotta do it in a particularly brutal way to make sure that nobody ever decides to step away from the Emperor's light ever again. The Eversor is a one-time use monster. We don't need to worry about stealth, but it's all about the presentation. I sliced into this very expensive blister pack to unearth my very small model. The assassins are normal humans, well as normal as any human is in 40k. A cybernetically enhanced psycho-indoctrinated war orphan who is hopped up on more drugs than his body has room for. He's a pretty simple build, and I don't know if it's just his tiny size or age of the kit, but the mold lines were kinda bad. I drilled out the barrel of his executioner bolt pistol and got him all assembled. He's about as small a model as I've ever built. The little fingers of his Nero Gauntlet are super fragile, and I'm a little nervous of the needle of his pistol as well, but so far so good. Now looking at him all together, the pose is very specific. He's leaping off a big piece of maybe some kind of flyer fuselage, so the gun is really held at a weird angle. And all over, he's at a weird angle. I don't know if I like it. I want to see if I can build him a little bit differently. I set his pistol down on a piece of paper towel so I don't accidentally smush any of the details and carefully cut it off at the wrist. Now I can tilt this into a more typical upright pose. And to get this there, I mixed up some greenaput. This is green stuff and milliput mixed together 50-50 so I can have the sturdiness of green stuff with the fine detail of the milliput. I shoved a small ball of this into his neck so that I can untilt his head using the round end of a sculpting tool to clean it up. And I did the same thing with his wrist, shoving in some greenaput and then squishing on his bolter until it was pointing in the direction his head is facing. I think this looks much better. This is a teeny tiny little dude, and this little guy, 120 points in game. That is a squad of Necron warriors, I think that's a squad of battle sisters, or it's this one fella. In 40k, the Eversor Assassin is about as far as you can push a human being in terms of its lethality. This guy is nuts, and I'm very excited to get him on the tabletop. But first, I gotta come up with a base for him. I'm not gonna use this little thing he came with. On my other assassins, I made up some battlefield rubble that matched the complexion of my Black Templar bases. That's the army I plan to ally this and my other assassins into. I shoved a magnet into a Cobalt Keep 32mm base and then got to work loading it up with cork. I glued down a chunk of 1/4 inch cork and then carved it on an angle so I can have an upright piece slid up against it, and I locked it all together with a generous amount of ultra thin superglue. I made up another piece on the opposite side, like my assassin is stalking through a battlefield, taking as much cover as he can on his way to his unfortunate target. I ripped up the cork with my fingers and I used my Dremel to grind down the center of the base. I tore the taller chunk of wall in half and then drilled some holes through it to insert some scale rebar. I'm using the barbed wire from Army Painter and I shoved this through the cork, making a few pieces going through horizontally. I made matching holes in the smaller piece and I threaded it through, bending it over so it looks like the wall is crumbling away, and I used nippers to trim off the excess wire. Then I locked it all in place with ultra thin superglue. I drilled some more holes into the cork vertically to add some more rebar, and I used some needle nose pliers to further destroy these walls. Now to make it look more wall-y and not so corky, I smeared some Tamiya basic putty over the flat faces and let them dry. Once that was dry, I used my hobby drill to make some bullet holes. Whatever structure this used to be, it has been thoroughly destroyed. Now before I add the rubble, I need to attach my guy. I drilled up into his leg with my Dremel and then inserted some 1mm brass rod. I drilled down into the base and then shoved him into place. This works out nicely because there is some cork wall protecting his tiny fingers and a little bit more cork sticking out on the other side to hopefully protect his needler from damage. With him in position, I can now finish the base. I put milliput over the edge to blend the cork into the base, and then I carefully sprinkled on some loose pebbles and sand, placing some small scale bricks with some tweezers. Right now it's all loose so I can really sculpt it on, and then I drenched it in ultra thin superglue to lock it all down once I was happy with the spread. Now my little assassin is standing on his lovely scenic base. I hit him with a black prime and then a zenithal from above with white ink. I hit his body multiple times until it was pure white on top, and I let it dust down onto the base to make it gray. Look at this little nut job. I really like him skipping across the ground as opposed to jumping off of that thing, and I am really excited to put this guy on the tabletop because he is just really solid. His profile is 2 Space Marines duct taped together with Lone Operative, but his weapons, the Nero Gauntlet and Power Sword, are 6 attacks hitting on 2s, sustained hits 3. So every 6 is 3 successful hits, which means that his 6 attacks is likely to cause 7 wounds. Oh, and those 7 wounds. Strength 5, AP -2, damage 2, precision, and anti-infantry 3 up. So you're almost always going to be rolling 3s to wound, and you're handing your opponent a boatload of dice, and you can choose for that to go on the squad or on the character. And as an assassin, he wants to be killing some characters. He will kill a Space Marine equivalent character, and you can make sure that that character dies because once per battle, he can pop his ability Overkill, which as the name implies, means he's gonna overkill probably by a lot. It adds 3 to his attacks, so that brings him up to 9 attacks. That's like, that can spike so high. It might be better to put it on the bodyguard units instead of the character because you might wipe them all. This guy, he wants to murder so bad. He's a lot of fun, and he has like ridiculous movement. Like with all of his different movement things stacked together, he's got like a 33-inch threat range. The only thing wrong is he's a human, so he's probably gonna die. He's like a one-time use thing, but man, that is gonna be a really fun one time. And now it is time to give the stabbiest boy a coat of paint. The most important part of any assassin is the spandex. Obviously, these hyper-elite assassins wear skin-tight suits. I started off thinning down a dark blue-gray paint, and I quickly spread this all over the clothing. This thinness of the paint helps the zenithal show through to help me out on the next part, laying on the highlights. I mixed up a lighter blue-gray and I painted this onto all the top parts of his muscles, working in layers from a dark gray all the way up to white. I wasn't super careful about my steps, but I'm going to be doing some more layers on top to blend it all together. Once I had them all highlighted up to pure white, I went back to my first highlight color and I glazed this right over all the layers I've done. This glazing helps to smooth over my transitions and darken my recesses. He is meant to be wearing black, so I don't want him to get too bright and shiny. After a coat of dark, I went back to my light, laying on some more highlight layers and reapplying my specular highlights of white to the shiniest spots. Comparing him to my Calidus assassin, it looks like I picked the wrong dark blue. He's a little too green in comparison. No big deal though, he's also a little too bright, so nothing a little glazing won't fix. I found a more purpley dark blue and I put this all over him. This is an extremely watery coat of paint, just to tint him down a little bit. I reapplied the brightest highlights and switched to a black paint and glazed this in the deepest recess of his clothing to push the contrast even further. It's a lot of fussing, but he's so small it really didn't take too much time. And now his skin suit is looking perfect. The rest of his armor and belts are all red. I took a dark red paint and base coated almost everything else. Similar to his blue clothing, after a dark layer, I began highlighting up through multiple layers of brighter reds, doing many layers until I was just painting with just edge highlights of my brightest, most saturated red. I have some decent contrast on these bits, but red is a funny color. It's hard to have as much contrast as I want with just red, so I cheated a little. I mixed some white into the paint and did another round of edge highlights with pink. Not everywhere, just in the spots I felt could use a little extra, like the top of his thigh armor and the edge of the backpack harness. I put a few tiny drops of very light pink in the corners, and now the 2 biggest chunks of this model are done. The Eversor assassins are living bombs. Human beings pushed to the absolute limits of ferocity through the use of super training and drugs. Lots of drugs. Now those drugs dramatically decrease their lifespan, so in between missions, basically every moment that they're not actively killing something, they're kept on ice, just to make sure they don't keel over before they can get the job done. When an Eversor assassin goes on a mission, they're kept asleep until the very last moment, typically drop potted in, and then as soon as those doors open, they start killing. And the second that they're done killing and they've accomplished their mission, they're put right back on ice. An Eversor's assassin's entire life is just the moment-to-moment mayhem of close combat. It's kind of like that Tom Cruise movie, Edge of Tomorrow. In that movie, his day restarts every time he dies. The Eversor assassin's day restarts every time their opponent dies. This is what makes the Eversor assassin so effective, and I'm excited to play with a little bit of that effectiveness on the tabletop. He's also got the grenade strat, which is nice, so you can run in, chuck a grenade to like blow up a Space Marine, and then absolutely wreck the commander out of the squad. Like this guy could snipe Ahriman out of a squad of Rubric Marines, or maybe kill a Lord Exultant out of a squad of Tormentors. A really good move would be killing a Necron Technomancer out of a squad of Wraiths. All good options. It can really take the wind out of your opponent's sail by literally taking the wind out of their sails. This guy is nearing completion. The only thing left is the fun stuff, the weapons, and that spooky scary face. Let's knock out that spooky scary face. The Zenithal Prime already gave me a good chunk of the way there. I used black wash to shade around the sides of his head, his ears, and the detail of his skull mask. While I was waiting for that to dry, I also used the black wash to further contrast his black armor, working it into the cracks. Once that was dry, I used some gray paint to darken around the sides of his face, the sides of his cheeks, and to smooth out some of the grit left behind by the wash. Once that was done, I switched to a light gray and began highlighting his face and forehead, doing a few layers to highlight the lighter gray until he was looking properly skeletal. Then I did some edge highlights of pure white, painting lines running around his eye holes, his tiny teeth, and along his forehead. His face is a skull to strike fear into his enemies. And speaking of striking fear, I always paint my assassin's techie parts in green. So I glazed a light green into his eyes, letting it spill into the mask and around these sockets. Then I dripped a tiny drop of Ghillie Dhu speed paint to make the recesses darker without losing saturation. Then came the painstaking task of somehow edge highlighting all the tiny little cylinders that make up his eyes. After I had it about right, I used more Ghillie Dhu to reinforce the dark center of these lenses. Then I took a white paint and carefully painted a dot right above each eye so it looks super reflective. This is one of the smallest helmets I've ever painted. Now, onto those weapons. For his poison claws, I used some gray paint to color the lower half of each talon, and I also put this onto the drug vials. Then I carefully gave his gauntlet and his bolt pistol a coat of Noble Skin speed paint, my favorite gun color. When that was dry, I dry brushed these bits with some silver paint. This makes the raised edges glitter and is a really nice middle ground between true metallic metal and non-metallic metal. For my other assassins, I painted the body of their weapons with some army green to show that they're still part of the Imperial military. I base coated the bolter armor with some dark army green and I gave it highlights of a lighter green. Then I used a little bit of chartreuse speed paint to shade the bolter and then it was onto the gold. He actually has a fair bit of gold. It seems like everything in 40k has a layer of gold. I painted this onto the aquila of his shoulder and on all the skulls all over him, and on the handle of his power sword. I used some darkwood speed paint thinned down to shade the gold, and then it was onto the drugs and techie bits. I took the color I used for his eyes and I base coated all the parts, hitting them with a mid-tone green, and then doing more and more layers of brighter and lighter greens until it was looking suitably intense. A little like Skaven Warpstone, which doesn't exist in 40k, unless you count the Harud. I worked all the way to white and then finished these spots off with a glazing of watery neon green. And you know what else needs a watery coat of neon green? That's right, EonsOfBattle.com. Over there we have all kinds of hobby goodies, army painter paints, brushes, wet palettes, basing cork, ultra thick and ultra thin superglue, and we have terrain. It's the best way to support us doing what we do by getting a membership. Each month members get a credit, good for any one terrain pack we've ever made, or the brand new one. New in January we have created the Tomb Library, a set of hyper advanced structures designed to quickly get a thematic defensive position up and running on the tabletop. The wall section creates an impenetrable fortress as they crackle with energy, floating just above the battlefield, and following just behind are the sarcophagus, ancient tombs of forbidden power with room to display the aliens' captured trophies and macabre exhibits. This terrain was designed by us and is available now at EonsOfBattle.com. He's looking so good, only a few things left, like the power cord of his camera, his power sword? Why is every wire in 40k exposed? Whatever the reason, I base coated it with a yellow and then carefully painted on some black hazard stripes. Once they were on there, I painted a stripe of gray right over top to make it look like the wire is shiny and reflective. And while I was working on the back of him, I noticed some more drug vials I somehow missed this whole time. I made sure those were painted, and now he is a teeny tiny mini, but that doesn't mean there's no room for decals. I found a tiny skull and I put this onto his knee pad, and the world's smallest aquila onto his shoulder. I don't know how useful this is, it's basically a white dot, but I managed to get it on there. I found a little red skull that I put onto his executioner pistol, and I gave these decals a coat of varnish. Then on the knee, I used some white paint to fix the cracks that formed when I crushed this decal onto his round knee, and I used some black wash to add some shadows so it matched the rest of the paint job. And speaking of that paint job, the next step is the base. My Templar base recipe is super simple. It's a watery airbrush coat of Vallejo earth, then a dry brushing of Pro Acryl olive flesh. That's it, but I decided to push this guy a little bit further. I sponged some more olive flesh around the edge of the ruined walls. Then I did a little airbrush dusting of antelope brown around the edge of the base. I did one final dry brushing of olive flesh, and then for the exposed rebar, I poured myself a shot of dirty down rust. This is my favorite way to do rust. I slobbered this all over the metal. Now, since the Eversor is all about making a mess, I took some Blood for the Blood God technical paint, and I took it onto a brush and I used my airbrush to blast this onto the wall, like he's really vaporized somebody. Then I sponged and brushed this onto his fingertips, and now he's looking good. I painted the rim of the base black, and it's time to give him a name. Top supporters on our website get their names on members of my crusade, and these two get to be assassins. Elitist butler ready for service. The Eversor Assassin. I'm really happy with how the highlighting turned out. He is glittering like a jewel. I mean, look at that tuchus. That is the hiney of an assassin. The assassins are kind of automatically fun things to include in the 40k list. The rest of my army all has like reasons to exist and strategies and things they're meant to do over the course of the game, but the assassin is the wild card. What is he gonna do? Who's he gonna kill? What really important charge is he gonna fail? With the Eversword now done, he can join my 3 out of the 4 assassins, the Calidus and the Vindicare. The only one left is the Caluxus, the anti-psyker assassin. And maybe if Sean ever managed to get his 1,000 Suns up and running, I'll have to get that guy too. Thanks for watching.